Good evening. Welcome to the RSU 5 Board of Directors meeting. It is Wednesday, February 12th, 2020, and we are here at the Freeport High School Library. The full board is here, absent Rhea. She's working this evening, so she sends her regrets. But we'll get started with the Pledge of Allegiance. So I would take for motion for consideration and approval of the minutes from the February 5th, 2020 meeting as presented, barring any errors or omissions. Maddie, thank you. Susanna, second. All those in favor? Great. Adjustments to the agenda.
Yes, we have one adjustment. We will be removing the budget review of the instructional support. She had a family emergency today, so we'll just have that report at our next board meeting.
Okay. All right. Good news and recognition. No Rhea. No Jen to fill in. Do we want someone else to give us some good news, or are we just going to... Maddie has some good news. Please share. Okay.
I'll just rep the high school drama program. The one acts are coming up. Local performances will be the weekend after we get back from break. So at the end of that first week back, I think it's a Friday and a Saturday. And then they will go to the regional competition the weekend after that, which is at Lawrence High School in Waterville. And please come out and see the one act and support your drama classmates.
Great. Thank you. Jen?
So there's lots of winter sports, things that are great, but the one that I know is happening this weekend. Tomorrow night, the boys varsity is playing at 9 o'clock at the Expo. Basketball. They're going in as the seeded 8th. The girls varsity is playing Saturday at 2 o'clock, and they're going in at first. So at the Expo, it's different because a lot of times it's at the Civic Center, but the first games are at the Expo.
Okay. Any other good news anyone wants to share? Okay, we will carry on. Public comment. So if we have anyone who wants to speak to anything this evening, we just ask you come up to the podium, provide us with your name and where you're from, and try to keep comments to 3 minutes. Okay. Nobody rushing for the microphone, so we will keep moving. No superintendent report or administrator reports this evening. Board comments or committee, no. Policy, no. This is a deceivingly quick beginning to the agenda. Okay, unfinished business. So we will move on to our budget review for this evening, and we will start with an update from Dr. Foley.
Okay, so I think everyone has in front of them a new green budget overview dated February 12th, 2020. And we still are at an expenditure impact of a 3.80, but because our proposed budget went up just a couple of $1,000 as we were making some tweaks, the tax impact has increased to a 4.77%. You also have the backup documents in front of you. Board members do, and we have now renumbered the articles based on the guidance from the state and what is standard practice with districts throughout the state. And I think that Anne has put what the former from last year, so Article 1 was previously Article 6. So we have that. So we have that for this year. Next year, we'll take that off, and it'll just be, this is our new numbering system. Region 10, we have reduced our estimation to 3% based upon an estimate that Nancy Weed gave me yesterday at a meeting. Unemployment rate increased, I think I reported last time a little bit, from 0.2% to 0.3%, and that has now been changed for all employees. And then we have updated the estimated salary and benefit increases. And on the last one, we inadvertently included a more outdated number, and we feel confident that that is the new updated number, and that puts off a percentage of 3.70, meaning that if we kept just our current budget and did nothing to it other than put in the estimated salary and benefit increases, we would have a 3.70% impact to the new budget. Our next steps, things we still don't know, we're still in negotiation with the support contract. Even though I feel like our Region 10 number is closer, that's still an estimation, as is the property and casualty insurance. One thing you still do not have in your packet is the reserve fund summaries document, and we're trying to revise that to make that more understandable, and I feel confident that we'll have that for you at the next board meeting. And we've just gone with the current tax impact page, and our hope is still to revise that to make that a little bit more clear. Those are all my budget updates since the last board meeting.
Okay. So we will move on to our first budget presentation of the evening. Pownell Elementary School, Lisa Demick.
Thank you. I'm going to start with thank yous for last year's allocation. And just to give you a little bit of an update, had two big asks last year. One was the 0.5 RTIB ed tech support for behavior. And I'm happy to report that Trevor Donahue is filling that position in his other half. He's also our phys ed teacher, so it's nice because it gives us some flexibility, and he's in the building full time. He's currently serving 11 students at various levels of intensity with positive behavior support plans. We've seen decrease in aggression, fewer absentees from some of these targeted students, and more ability to focus on academics. So we feel like it's already having a really positive impact. So thank you on that one. The other request last year was around the additional field trip funding, with that funding this year, we're able to offer an off-campus experience for every grade level, and in addition, our 3 through 5 is also able to do a PSO experience. One of the ways that the timing for this has worked out so well is our parent group, which I think, as you know, is called Impact, is facing a sort of a review of their insurance, and they're looking at that taking a big hit. And we've been very lucky that they've generously funded a lot of the field trips we've been able to offer in the past, and they're taking a close look at that. So it's really nice to have those district funds to make sure that we can keep that level of field experience. The only field experience that we currently charge for is our Chewonki 5th grade experience. It's a 3-night overnight, and that's capped at $50 a student. And the way that Impact has been able to help us with that is around scholarships for anyone that needs them. So we feel like everyone has access to that. We've been able to reduce the funding, the mad rush for funding for the Boston trip, so that's been a nice thing. But have been able to keep the 5th graders involved in that with a couple of bake sales, so they feel like they're contributing to their trip. So that was something that we wanted to do. One of our asks is directly related to that funding, and that is a request for $500 in district funds for enrichment. We currently enjoy kind of an alternating artist in residence or author visit each year, and learned that the other elementary schools have some of that enrichment money in their budget, and we're finding that those author visits are going up and up. We used to be able to fund an author visit for about $500. It's now the going rate is now over $1,000. So that $500 will help us to augment the money that we get from Impact for either an artist in residence or an author visit. My other big ask is, as I hope you know, we are going back to half-day pre-K next year. We are no longer sharing a pre-K teacher with Moore Street. We have, but when Moore Street added to their pre-K program last year, Sarah Mason became full-time at Moore Street, and we've hired a wonderful pre-K teacher, Kelly Howard. She's currently 0.4 for us. We'd like to be able to offer half-day pre-K 5 mornings a week next year. So that's my request, is for a 0.1 pre-K teacher. And that, again, when Sarah Mason was at Pownell, we didn't have a Friday program, but because she was the teacher at Moore Street, if there were kids that needed that extra boost, she could invite them to Moore Street, and it wasn't that big of a deal because she was still their teacher. Whereas this year, that Friday program is full, and it would not sort of have the same impact because it wouldn't be the same teacher. We're able to not ask for the extra pre-K ed tech time because by going to half days, we don't have to cover that person's lunch, and that gives us a little bit more time, and we're able to absorb the pre-K ed tech time. So that's what I'm looking for this year. Any questions?
Do you want to talk about the library that's on both last year and this year?
Yes, sorry. I forgot about that one. So one of the things that we did in funding the library books a few years back was to go to a per pupil expenditure, and that makes the library book budget about $2,000 a year for Patty in a typical funding year. And she had identified that the age of the collection and also the target of the collection, the target of the collection was very much toward older students because of when Pownell was a pre-K to 8 school, and a number of the books she needed to really remove from the shelves just because they weren't accurate anymore, and so she really targeted her nonfiction collection. So last year I asked for a $4,000 bump in that library budget to just try and help her to focus on that nonfiction part of her collection. The other thing that she's done in the past is you can order books where they come with, the shiny plastic that library books tend to come with. You can order them so that they come that way, or you can order them so you have to do that covering yourself. And so Patty has always done that covering herself, and her volunteer support has just kind of dried up in that area, and I'd rather have her working with kids or working on her collection than putting plastic on books. So we've opted for the books that come already covered. So she felt like that that bump last year was able to, give her a good leap. And we thought if we asked for half of that amount again this year, we would be able to she's really going to target some of the early picture books in the collection. So, yeah. She'll also be going to Moore Street for an extra half day next year. So that was another part of that decision making in not having time that she's spending covering books.
So I have a question, and it's not just for you, Lisa, but it's also for all the elementary schools that have third graders in them. When we looked at the scorecard, it was evident that there was a need for math support to improve the scores in third grade. What's the plan at Pownell to basically provide those supports.
So
And would it have any budget impact?
Right. So one of the things that really impacted that math support last year for third grade was the some high need behavior students. So in funding the RTIB Ed Tech position, what we've been able to do is to make sure that the academic support is actually going to academic support. And so we had to pull our Ed Tech that was supposed to be doing RTIA, to cover a couple of high needs students. So that's why we didn't need to ask for more support, because the RTIB position has really helped us to be able to do that support.
I'm in total support of the library. I ran a library, so I totally appreciate the library. And
you want to volunteer to cover books?
I spent 10 years covering books. I totally agree with that, with spending the money to have them covered. But what I'm wondering, I just thought of this when you were talking, is there any kind of interlibrary among the elementary schools in the RSU? Because that seems like it would be such a great thing if you're doing, say, a unit on different something different, and the books could move around. Do you do anything like that?
We do, and in fact, we take advantage of the state interlibrary loan as well. So Patty will often get books from Portland Public Libraries when we have Melissa Stewart coming, or this spring we have Kevin Hawks coming, and so she'll borrow from lots of different places. But I would say one thing I'm really proud of in this district is that we have certified librarians in our position. That was a big change for me. I taught in Ohio for 12 years, and the librarian in Ohio was like the most skilled person in the building. And so when I came to Maine, and it was such common practice to have an ed tech in the library, I really saw how that impacted the collection. So that's another thing I think our elementary librarians are doing, is really working to make sure that they're bringing the best books to our students. They're doing a lot with the windows and mirrors work around making sure that there's diversity in the library, and also really working on accuracy and appeal.
Right. They call it library science, right, for a reason.
Yeah, and it's a master's, right? So.
Let me just clarify. I ran a library in a county jail for 10 years, so that was not. They did not require. Yeah, they did not require a master's.
Any other questions for Lisa? Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so next on our list is Mass Landing School, Emily Grimm.
Good evening. Like Lisa, I want to start just with gratitude for the way that funding the last 2 years has enabled us to do some more meaningful work with kids, both through regular education, social work, and most recently the addition of an ed tech. Together, these two staff have enabled us to be much more proactive in supporting students. So our ed tech each day has 7 students she works with directly, and another 4 to 5, the caseloads ebb and flow a little bit, that she might support on an all-call or on-call basis. This enables proactive things like checking in and checking out daily. So, for example, today I had a student in a class who has a daily plan, and on it he had a Post-it that the two of them had created at the end of yesterday, reflecting on yesterday's day and what his focus was going to be for today. So she provides check-in, check-out support. She pushes into classrooms. We're able to be more proactive at transitions in the day. So, for example, we have a student who struggles to transition effectively from recess back into academics and was losing a lot of academic time. So she pulls that student 5 minutes before the end of recess. They do an art activity together for about 10 minutes, and that reset has enabled that student to transition effectively. And then one of the pieces that excites me the most is that ed tech partners with our social workers, who's essentially the caseworker for those students, because at the end of the day, this is really about skill building, not just compliance. And so the ed tech really exists to support the behavioral goals that the social worker is working on. And most of those are focused on emotional regulation. And what do you do when you sense your body's in a place that's going to make it hard to be a learner, both for yourself, but for other kids as well in the class? And so having the ed tech enables us to use any moment, where a student is struggling as a moment to teach in. And not only is that proactive, it's also really consistent response, whereas a year ago it would have been like, who's available in the building right now, which often it was me, but not always me, so that we're able to be more consistent. And it's really helping kids have more time in the classroom, which is a great thing for those kids, and honestly for every other kid who's serviced in the classrooms where those kids attend as well. So thank you, because that's made a big difference in being able to feel like we're really meeting kids' holistic needs. So transitioning into this year, you'll see there are several asks. One is with our RTI Literacy position. So this position currently, Susan Martling fills it in a 0.8 role. She carries year over year about a caseload of 24, which is similar to our math intervention. And really, to me, that's the sweet spot of where we want to be between that and special ed. It means a quarter or just under a quarter of our students are serviced in an intervention setting. Really, if the number starts to get higher than that, we start to go like, what are we not doing in the regular education classroom to support those students? But this addition would allow us to do a few things. Right now, a lot of our progress monitoring of student data, and that's really looking all 80 kids in a grade, for example, across the year, we're looking to make sure all kids are on track to make a year of growth. A lot of that high-level review happens at the team level. And what we'd like to do is move that more to a leadership level and have the teams then free up time to do case study work. So rather than go down 80 kids, like, okay, this kid started here, they're here, okay, that's good. Next kid, to instead take a couple kids that they'd like to collaborate on and do a deeper dive at those students. So it's a more qualitative look at student work, a student writing sample, student's running record, all the data we have on a student. So it would enable Susan with that additional 0.2 to take on that progress monitoring piece, and then also to support teachers with interventions in the classroom, because that's a lot of the work we do, is not just having a student come out of the classroom for intervention in a content area, but also a teacher thinking about what skill they're targeting in the regular ed classroom. And Susan would be able to serve in that capacity with that additional time. There are also 2 stipend requests, which are really exciting. They're things we've been able, through the gratitude or like the generosity of our staff who have offered these just with their own time. One is Civil Rights Team, which to me is a double benefit, because not only does it offer an opportunity for 18 of our kids to learn a lot about civil rights teams, to be civil rights issues, to be connected with other teams in the state, and to present in a leadership role to our kids, but it benefits our community in that all our kids are then benefiting from that education. So for example, in January, our team presented about kind of what are civil rights issues, and kids ask questions at a whole school assembly. So this would enable this to be a sustainable opportunity for our kids. The other is that Gail Walatsky and Chelsea Secudis have created a robotics club. So we've been fortunate to get a lot of grant funding in the past few years. We have a wonderful collection of Lego robotics. And this is a club that meets Thursday mornings before school. Kids can take the middle school and high school bus runs, so there's kind of equity and access to it. It's not dependent on early transportation, and it's a great way for kids to continue to explore another area. There are a lot of kids who are already really passionate about it's a loud group, and I mean that in a good way if you're down by their room on Thursday morning. So this would, again, ensure that that's a sustainable opportunity for our kids. You'll see there was an additional request for book funds for our book rooms. Our library book room has sets of texts, and this might be 4 to 6 copies of a single text, because the units of study we use for reading and writing has students often working in book clubs. And you can imagine this is a great place for students to make meaning of text together, to have conversations, to work on a lot of the skills around comprehension, which are a big focus for our school at this point in time. And what we haven't updated anything in that room for 9 years, and we're just at a place where it needs a little bit of freshening up. The 5th graders, for example, right now are in social issue book clubs. It would be great to have some books that reflect more contemporary social issues. And to Lisa's point, one of the things we've been doing with all our libraries, classroom libraries, and formal libraries, is making sure that those libraries reflect our country and our world and our students' lives as well. So that $2,000 would enable us to get between 40 and 50 additional sets for that book room space. I'll comment on field learning because I'm assuming I'd get the question. So we were a building that took a pretty big hit with this change in funding formula. What we've done is we have continued, so our third graders go to Wolf Neck Farm School for 4 days. They'll continue to do that. It will continue to be no cost for families, both through a contribution from our PTC alongside some of the student funds that were allocated for this purpose. Our fourth graders go to a 2-day, 1-night experience at the ecology school, as well as do a puffin trip in the spring. And so the parent ask for those 2 trips is $40. And then our fifth graders who go to Chwanki's outdoor classroom, which Lisa mentioned, as well as to Boston in the planetarium, have had a large ask. That ask has been $150, and we worked really hard to lower it to that point. The true cost of those trips, all 3 together, is $280. And what I've noticed, I pulled the data today, we've had 44% of families pay. Typically, we have about 75%. So it's been interesting. I didn't ask for a shift in the budget, in part because I didn't have these numbers yet. But one of the questions it brings up for me is kind of what's that tipping point at which parents pay nothing. We've had no parents partially pay. So parents have either chosen to pay full or to pay nothing. And in some ways, we're actually going to be about where we were when we had a lower ask but had higher participation rates. So it will be something that we'll have to look at and consider. I wasn't comfortable going above 150 for the ask, and it may be hard this year to make it work. So it'll be something our team is looking at about in consideration of what programming we offer our kids 3, 4, and 5. Questions?
Questions for Emily? Jen?
So going back to the field trip, when you say that the participation, so if they don't pay, they don't go?
No, 100% of kids go.
100% go, but only what was
I might be holding some bake sales at
No,
my
I know, right?
house in Freeport, but
What was the excuse me, the percentage that pay versus, you said it's about half?
So this year, right now, we're at 44%. That's like at the soft deadline we give parents. I expect that my gut is we'll end up at about 60%. Historically, depending on the cohort, between 75 and 80% of parents pay. It ebbs and flows a little bit, which honestly is about what I'd expect given our free and reduced lunch rates.
I'm just wondering, what does that look like in terms of like a parent and how that's presented to them and how they respond to it, and is it like what
the ask. So we send
what does it look like?
Yeah, so we send a letter home in January that kind of outlines field-based learning and our philosophy of why kids have these opportunities, what the opportunities are, and that the ask with the cost. So in this case, $150, and a recognition that that's something some families will be unable to do or be able to do in a partial way. Also, and we're very clear that all students go independent of ability to pay, and that if they'd like to have a conversation about scholarship from the sense of like, hey, we can pay 50, but 150 we can't. We give about a 3-month runway, 2-month runway to pay, recognizing that's helpful for some families. We actually sent the letter a little bit earlier this year. Last year we sent it in January, this year in December, to try to give that awareness that the cost was coming up. I would say of the parents who don't pay, a third reach out and say, hey, and we give them, so they reach out to our school counselor. So it's a conversation between them. A third will reach out and say, like, this is not happening. A third won't contact us at all. And a third might try to work with us in some way, but we're really explicit that this isn't, like, to me, it's important that all kids have this experience. And honestly, it's part of the reason we offer it, because we feel like we have kids who will never have this opportunity if we're not creating it for them.
Is there anything on the papers that go out that gives parents an opportunity to, like, donate to a scholarship fund or pay for a partial?
It's interesting. After the communication went out, I had a PTC dad provide this great, he's like, I wish I knew it was $280. Like, we would pay $280 if we knew. So it's a learning for next year. We do say we welcome families who want to subsidize the experience for others. And some years, last year, we actually had a handful of parents who did that, and it was hugely helpful. This year, like I said, it ebbs a little bit year to year based on cohort. That's what we plan to do in the future, just so parents who are able to pay recognize that it's subsidized heavily, both by our PTC. We've added some fundraising that we didn't have in the past, so we have a directory that's about to come out for K-5 Freeport kids, for families, that our PTC has secured ad revenue for. And then the fifth graders hosted a book sale, a used book sale in the fall, and a used book sale in the spring. So we've added some additional pieces to try to offset that cost as well.
Can you remind us what the cost asked for parents was in the past?
It has been last year was 100, and I believe the year before I believe was 75. That was our first year doing Chewonki, and Chewonki basically, when we started the conversation, Chewonki was like, "This year, just pay us what you can." And I was like, "How about $50 a kid or something?" Like with Boston. So the first year right now we pay, our hard cost to Chewonki is $200 a student, and that's our negotiated rate going forward. That won't change. But the first year, I think we paid $60 a student, just because they were excited about the partnership, and we intended for it to be a long-term partnership.
So Emily, I know that at the middle school they've had a great success rate when they actually encourage parents to donate, and they even put an online tool to donate. Have you considered doing that? Because they raised a bunch of money doing that, and I'm sure a lot of parents would do that for Mass Landing as well.
I did. I think that Mass Landing and the middle school got different communication from the budget office at central office, because I was told I could not use PayPal because we pursued that avenue, that just online payment got a higher rate. So it's something that we have to figure out. But when we sent our letter out, the information I got at the time was that due to accounting, it was not possible to use PayPal, to create a PayPal account for Mass Landing School.
And if you wanted to maintain the price at $100 per student, what would that be in terms of additional money that you would need?
$4,000. It's a little bit cohort dependent. We have typically about 80 students per cohort. So that plus another 50 if you're reducing the cost by 50 per family. And that would be ideal. This is the first year it's felt like the ask has actually impacted participation. I mean, knowing that our data set is 3 years, so I'd like be a little bit cautious about using a 3-year data set as, this huge data set. But when I look down the list right now, like not even seeing half payment mid-April, like I would be floored if we hit that 75% of parents paying.
So what will happen if you don't have money? Will you have to cancel the trip, or what will you do?
Oh no, we're going.
Right. I was hoping you'd say that, but how are you going to pay for it?
Yeah, we'll look at a couple things. I'll go to my PTC. We'll look at other fundraising options. It's it's mid-February, so we've got a few pathways. Last year we had, honestly, like you'll remember the Life Touch photos, which were not necessarily everyone's favorite thing, but Life Touch cut us a big check to get to the finish line on making sure we could pay for that experience. So, and that's the balance, right? It's, I think actually some pieces, like having students do the book sale, has been a great piece. I actually think there's value to that. Not only like the idea of selling used books for $1 feels like a nice fundraiser in terms of families sharing books, but kids having some role in fundraising for an experience that does have a real cost. But also not engaging in things that we really don't want to do, just so that we can ensure that we have the payment.
I agree with that, and I heard from a lot of parents last year, and I include myself in the group of parents who thought that it was excessive to have a third retake of a picture and then have all the printed photographs come home without any parent even to buy them.
The feedback was consistent.
So I really would hate to put any principal in a position where you guys have to go to that length and that extreme to fund a field trip. So I really want to know, if you need the money, we need to know, because if that's the choice that you have to make, I personally want to know now. because we spend a lot of money for those kids to be in school learning. So having them go for a third picture take or whatever it is that is not educational, just so that we can send them to the field trip, that is super educational and we do not want to cut, is a really awkward and tough position for you to be in. And
oh yeah, standing in the traffic circle and answering those questions. It's like not my favorite job either.
Right, and you have more important things to do than worrying about, okay, where is the extra money coming from so all the kids can go. So thank you for being candid and honest, and hopefully before we wrap up the budget, we'll know how things are looking on your end.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for the questions.
Can I ask about the two stipend positions, the Robotics Club and the Civil Rights Club? I know the stipend committee has done like yeoman's work on the list of stipends and making sure everything is accurate and up to date. Are these new to the list, or?
Yes, they're actually. I don't know that they have been approved by the application is the application is submitted.
Okay. Oh, okay. Okay. Yes.
But I will say my ears pricked up, and from what she just said, it
sounds like great ones to have,
it's
right?
the kind of thing we would be likely to approve. She said the right numbers.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other questions, comments for Emily? You have another?
Same as for Lisa.
Yeah, I was like, I know that's coming. So in our building, while third grade math was our lowest data, to me, I'm always cautious about using a single year of data to determine that something's a trend. There were a couple learnings for us from it. One, like Lisa mentioned, that cohort has some unique needs. For example, our RTIB staff are disproportionately serving our current fourth grade cohort, which is great news because it's able to respond to some of the needs that we had last year, both in the impact on the whole classroom, but also on ensuring that some of those students who struggle with emotional regulation can be in the classroom for learning. So that's been one piece that's helped address it. One of the things we've done too, that's been a really recent shift in a decision, but's been kind of a year of looking at data, is looking at our teaming structure. So at Mass Landing School, teachers team with another teacher, and some teachers have teamed for quite a while, long past my tenure. Other teachers have teamed for just the last 3 years. And what we've noticed through that examination is our teachers are doing much better with their homeroom cohort than the cohort they get for 1 period a day. So if I teach math, and often the spread is 20 points or greater. And we see that actually most in our math data. So if you're in my homeroom, I might be getting 60% of kids to proficiency on the MEA, but the class I get another for 1 period a day is 35%. So we've been looking at that data and just I noticed that trend about a year ago, and we've been digging into it. The leadership team, was part of my decision that that is not necessarily working best for kids, and that trying to be a specialist in the lower grades is actually not in the service of kids, even though it allows a little more specialty and content, that the data is actually not showing that we're getting that return. So one thing we'll be shifting in our practice next year is moving away from that in the third and fourth grades. We're keeping that as a practice in fifth grade, both because the fifth grade data is a little bit different and because we think it helps support the transition from fifth into sixth. But for third and fourth grade, teachers will have a homeroom of students through the day. And our feeling is that consistency, that knowing the child actually surpasses knowing being able to like double plan for that content, so to speak. So that's one change that has come out of not just the third grade math data, but the third grade math data was one area where that was really apparent. And I think, given one of my conversations with my staff has been, when a student's transferring into a new school, like our third graders ready to do what we're asking them to do on day one. So they're in a new building and they go from having a single homeroom teacher to then, across 2 homerooms, and then students who might be getting special ed or RTI then are in multiple rooms across the day. So really ensuring that we're building kids' skills to do what we're asking them to do, whether it's academically or just the process of moving through the building and working with different behavioral expectations teachers may have, et cetera. So.
Is math always the one that's the swap, or does it vary?
It's so in all but 2 classrooms last year, it was independent of content. So reading is the same way. If I teach 2 readings, my homeroom reading data is better than the kids I get.
Okay.
And usually, interestingly, for most teachers, also consistent from NWA to MEA. So if there was a difference on the growth data for NWA, there was a difference on the MEA achievement data. And a teacher raised a great question, which is it just that it might be the second period of the day that the data is better, right? You'd think like you get to do a do-over, right? And you've made some refinements.
Better now.
Independent of whether it was the first or second class that they had taught of that content. So
What an
in a
interesting,
year, we'll have some more data.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Suzanne.
Building on that, what you just said there, the classes, and looking at maybe the math as not attaining the same achievement levels, are students having these classes at different times throughout the day? And that work showing that learning happens at different times.
Yeah, so most students so half the students with teaming, half our students have math first block of the day. Often teachers, so the way our schedule generally works is there's a morning meeting, an academic block, recess, 2 academic blocks, or an academic block specials. Teachers have largely preferred to have math early in the day. So with teaming, not everyone can do math early in the day, but teachers have done one of their 2 math blocks early in the day, and then the second falls in that 2 block that's between recess and lunch.
But does that mean that the same student has math at the same time every
All
day?
year.
Okay, that's what I was wondering.
Yep. And some teachers at one point, we 2 years ago, there was a teacher team that swapped it halfway through the year, feeling that the group that has the second class gets the advantage because you've taught it once and you see like, oh, I'm going to tweak this, right? And their teachers are literally like recess. They'll like change a homework assignment or something based on what they learned that first block. But there's a huge trickle down because schedules are dependent on special ed schedules, on intervention schedules. So it's bigger than just 2 teachers saying like, hey, Maddie and I, we'll just swap.
Yeah.
Because kids are getting pulled for other services.
Okay, yeah, it was more just on,
That was probably more than you needed.
Not necessarily the teacher scheduling side, but in terms of students learning differently at different times of the day and whether that had been factored in. That was
Not
that question.
not in terms of looking at like a cohort A and a cohort B.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so we are going to postpone instructional support and move on to curriculum, instruction, and assessment. Cynthia Alexander.
Good evening. It's a pink sheet, and we'll start with the improvement of instruction side. Thank you so much. I'll follow their gratitude. Thank you so much for supporting the stipend and the mentor chair stipend position, the mentors and the mentor chair. As you know, we came to the board with all of that last year, and it's been very successful. I think I've mentioned that a couple of times. Chelsea Secudis is the mentor chair, is doing a fabulous job in communication and follow through if there's something that comes up on any side of the coin. So it's going very, very well. We have 3 teachers that will next year have the same mentor again, because if you remember from that handbook, if they're a brand new teacher, never taught anywhere else, they get a second year. And so 3 of those will remain in that position. And then I think I had mentioned to you before, on average, we have about 25 new staff in our induction each year. So I'm not asking for anything new this year, because what we have in place will accommodate our need for the coming year, we hope. And then there are no other asks for this year for staffing. And all of the other areas under improvement of instruction we're maintaining the same level of support. On the other side, I have the gifted and talented education. And our services, if just for those of you who are new to the board, our services are primarily given by 3 gate teachers, and that is still a sufficient and adequate amount of instructional services that are provided. They mostly are servicing students in grades 4 through 8. And they do 2 of those gate teachers consult at the high school level with our gate staff, with our gate students. One meets with 9 and 10th graders, and then the other one meets with 11th and 12th graders. And that they actually have changed the model. They send out an invitation several times to meet. The guidance counselors are very aware and very much involved in that process as well. So they take a big role in making sure that all of our GATE students are getting the courses that they need, and if they feel like they're not, figuring out what other ways we can make sure their needs are met. So we're not having any asks for any staffing in the GATE, and Chelsea and I sit down every year, and Secudis, who is the same person I mentioned on the other side, and she's very busy and very good, and these ladies can attest to that. These 2 principals can attest to that. She works very closely with them in their buildings. And she and I sit down and we go over the budget and review it, and we share documents. And so, and it's been very adequate for what we've asked. And so there's no increase to the GATE budget. That's all I have.
Kate.
I was wondering if you could let me know if there's been any thought put into how we could improve the gifted and talented program for music at the middle school.
Has there been any thought into how we can improve it at the middle school?
Yeah.
Can you give me more specifics about what you think might be?
Well, right now I think it's kind of structured like there's just a few additional opportunities to maybe do pep band or jazz band, that kind of thing, but not a lot focused on improved instruction per se. I wonder, just from personal experience, if some students start to lose interest in playing their instrument because of just the monotony of doing just band and not some more creative challenges in the area of music, in at least from, I don't know if there's gifted and talented chorus too. I'm just talking about from band perspective.
Right. I'd have to, consult with Chelsea on that, because for those of you who don't know, we have the GATE teachers that we employ. There are 3 of them for the academic area, and then we have stipends for the art and for the music. And typically, they are our staff that will apply for those stipends. And so, at this time, I'd have to check in with Chelsea to see if they've done anything extra or different than they've done before, or what happens oftentimes, and this is true in the academic or the arts, if there's a parent or a student who feel like their needs aren't being met, we work with them in different ways. We've have separate projects for academics. We've had several of kids that have done that. Some are pushed in, some are pulled out. It's really individualized, and so I know that Chelsea's very on top of that and talks with the teachers who are doing the stipends and trying to meet their needs. But if you want, I can get more information from her and share that with you or with the board.
I was just wondering, is there any sort of gifted and talented advisory committee of any
Yes,
sort?
we meet. Yep, we meet a couple of times a year.
And does it just have staff members, or does it have like parents and a
So
mixture of...
there's a list that Chelsea has of parents, and it gets sent out to all of the parents. The agenda gets sent out ahead of time to all of the parents, and all of the gate teachers go to the meeting, and I go to most of them. So
I've
you're
never
looking at me.
received
Okay, we'll
I have
add
a
you to
daughter
the
that's
list.
in it, so I was just wondering about that. Thank you.
Okay, so we will add you to the list.
Maddie?
I was just going to say, it's Erin York who does the gate music for Freeport Middle School, and it's I just think it's a lot. She's got a lot of kids there, and it's just super busy. I think you're right. There's extra performances and extra learning, but not necessarily one-on-one instruction. But I'm happy to hear you just ask that question, and that's something I would have loved to have had the opportunity to participate in at some point.
And is it the same, like the gifted and talented music in Durham Middle School? Are they invited, because they have separate bands? So do they have? I mean, I don't think there's any separate.
So this
group.
year there are no identified in band.
Okay.
There are a couple of them that are getting extra enrichment, so we do fill that stipend, but there are no, and the one that's identified in the middle school level is not playing in instruments for chorus.
Okay.
So,
So they have options too for on the choral side, because that's what I was thinking is it's not just
yes,
playing
it's
an
either
instrument. It could
right,
be.
exactly.
So they have additional options too. It just seems like the gate music piece we've heard through the years as like, I think the process for identification is well laid out in how they do
those
it.
are very much improved.
And then it was, what we'd heard in the past, and it sounds like it's improved from there, was like, great, now you're identified. We got nothing for you.
Yeah.
So it sounds like they're making progress, which is fantastic. Yes. But I think there's probably still some room there too. Yeah. So, Valerie.
So at some point there was talk about trying to pair the students who were identified to people in the community who are artists or musicians, performing artists. Has that ever come to pass? I mean, there was a big push to do that because we knew that we would have to rely on the community, and it was a very special thing for one of the kids to have a mentor in the community.
Were you at that meeting?
And we even talked about AFCA and the schools, ACAF, sorry. You've changed it so many times. I'm sorry.
we did. We had, I'm trying to remember back because it seemed like it was over maybe 2 years ago, but was it a year ago? There was a list that was generated, and so we got the list of supports, but I don't think there was complete follow through with, I'm not sure where that landed. So it sounds like I need to get some information and report back to you on that.
Because there are two students that I know of who were mentored by community members, and they had a very rich and deep experience.
Right.
And it's something that we can replicate for anybody who wants it. It would be great.
I had Maddie, go ahead.
I thought Becky was going to say something.
Well,
do you want to say it first?
They do have individualized or small group lessons, do they not, at the middle school? For if you're playing an instrument?
That's regular band. They do have lessons for regular band, but for the gate music stuff, they just rehearse for their extra. I hate to say just, because I know it's a lot of work and they do great things, but I don't think it's extra instruction other than rehearsing, which is instructive.
But is it normally like small group? Like I'm just
It's by
trying to,
instrument
and
usually.
I,
instrument.
so having played the clarinet at one point, to me a lot of why we do identify students for like gifted and talented is because we want the instruction to be more individualized. And so if they're able to do that, I think if the other student was so far ahead, I would hope that the band teacher was figuring out a different time to instruct them. If there were 4 kids playing clarinet and one was so far ahead of the other 3, I would hope that they're doing some individualized lesson.
I can't speak to the I know that they're meeting their needs, but I can't speak to the individual students because I don't know.
Thank you.
They are.
However, I do know of at least one situation at the high school where that has happened. And I just, to Valley bringing up, this opportunity to partner in the community, ACAF is the Arts and Cultural Alliance of
Right.
Freeport.
That's
And
the group.
there is a school and youth committee, which I chair, and we have a list, a email list. So you get it. You should probably be on that list. Chelsea gets those emails. And right now we're doing programming, but we are charged to fulfill the community's mission to have greater interaction between our cultural and artist experts who live in our surrounding community and the kids. And so I guess this would be a PSA to those of you who work in the administration and anyone listening to help us make those connections. It's difficult because, as a chair of that committee, the last thing I want to do is I don't want to burden our teachers with another thing that they have to do, but I also want to make sure that if there's a kid who plays the clarinet who would really love to learn jazz and sit down for a one-on-one lesson with somebody, like that would be awesome and probably wouldn't cost anybody anything, and it would be enriching for the individuals and the community.
And I wouldn't say that would be a burden because the two kids that I know of, the gate teachers contacted me and I put them in touch with people that I knew.
Okay.
And it wasn't a burden to the teachers. They were glad to have someone help them. So I think they will be
And that was
delighted
this
to know
year?
that there are other people out there who can help.
Yeah.
A couple of years ago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And I would say that would always be like, before you ask for extra money, like, see what's available through your local organizations.
Yeah, this was free mentoring.
Yeah, and so I apologize. If I had the questions ahead of time, I could have asked Chelsea more specifically. So I apologize for not having those. But I don't have the details on each student. I couldn't even tell you all the names of the students. So, but I can certainly get that information for you and have that for next time if you like.
Just as the risk person speaking, do we put them through background checks and stuff, the community members, so they follow that same process for that? So, okay.
Thank you.
If they're alone with kids, which,
Yes.
Yes. Lindsay.
Just quickly, how are the academic 4 through 12 students identified, just as a newbie to the whole gate thing?
Yep. So there's a formalized identification process. We look at student data. We have teacher recommendation. A parent can request that they be assessed for that. So we identify them in 3rd and 5th grade. We take at least a full, Chelsea pulls all the data together. We look at all the things you looked at on the scorecard. For example, they're given a COGAT test. And so they have all of the information. There's 3 pieces of that we look at. And so they're identified either in reading or math or general. And then they're sent the letter. And so we do this in June. The whole process starts earlier than that, but the identification day is in June, and they get the letter toward the end of the school year. If somebody moves in, or if someone like in 4th grade and they were identified before, they get looked at or they're picked up, and then they will be reassessed on their 5th grade year, and a parent can always request. Yep. And we have currently 5, a little slightly over. You're supposed to. The guideline is 5%, and we have slightly over 5% that are identified.
So I just had a question on the mentor, on that side.
Yes.
I was just curious how the recruitment of mentors went, and how did you have plenty of people offering to be mentors? Did you have to beg and plead and steal to get mentors?
So we tried a few different things. I had started with in the newsletters that all get read cover to cover, putting that out there over a year ago, sending out specific emails for that around this time last year. Chelsea did some recruitment and in different ways. We talked with the principals, both Chelsea and I, about having them invite people, coming from their building principal, saying it at a staff meeting or in an email, inviting them. And so we had a certain amount that did the training. And then as the summer went on, we found we needed a few more, that first year. And so, particularly, there were a couple in special ed. And so Bonnie and I would have a conversation. And so then she recruited a couple more. So it was a lot of reaching out. Now we have a pool. They're already trained. They're in the pool. It's one training, but they have ongoing, I would say, PD days during the year as part of their stipend. And so we're going to be putting that out again to grab more. So we're hoping to get at least 50 to 70 in the pool, which would be great, because then they might want a year off. One of the challenges too is if they're coaching, which we have a lot of teachers that do some coaching, it might be difficult. They may opt not to do that because the best time they might choose to meet might be after school, depending on their schedules. And so Chelsea and I often talk about, she'll bring a case to me and say, what do you think about this? And she's super thoughtful and reflective and, comes up with some good solutions. And so it's worked out very well. And I'm hoping if we can get at least a base of 70, that would be great.
I mean, that's a big percentage of our teachers, right?
It is. I think we have 200 and some odd teachers. And if you think in the last 3 years, we've had, now when I say teachers, I'm including nurses and anybody under the contract. So it's not like classroom teachers that we've replaced every year. But so in the last 3 years, we've had 75 new staff under that contract. And so, we've had some nurses that are mentors, specialty areas that are mentors. So that would be a nice pool. I think that would be a really nice pool if we had 70. So right now we probably have 30. So we're getting there.
That raises an interesting question. I'm wondering how hard it is across the board to fill some stipend positions, just because I know that the class of 2022 was without an advisor for a while this year, and the kids were out recruiting. So, because they needed an advisor in order to get stuff done. So I'm just wondering if that was an anomaly, or if we sometimes have a problem filling these positions.
I think that's an anomaly.
Yeah. Many have multiple stipends.
I mean, we have trouble teachers filling some, like
super specific.
Yeah, ones. Right. Foreign language teacher, as you know, we struggled with this year, but I don't think on average we struggle like that.
Any other questions for Cynthia?
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. We're ahead of schedule. Oh. Okay. All right. So, new business 12B is cost sharing discussion. So I'm going to hand it off to Kate.
Okay, but you need to help me as I go through this because I want to make sure everybody can follow it. Okay. The first item under 12B was just an update to what we handed out to you back in November. The first page of that was just an update to the third page of the memo we had given you guys to, instead of using the census data for, I think it was market value of a home, we replaced that with the median assessed home value, which we got from each of the 3 towns' assessors. And of course that then updated the median home education tax number too. So that's just to replace that page 3 or supplement that page 3. And then the rest is just the only thing updated in this, which was the current cost sharing formula, calculations of total contribution and the comparison of percent total contribution to percent pupil count. The only thing that updated was in fiscal year 10, the pupil count percentage was copied over incorrectly. So it was just the same number as fiscal year 11 by mistake. So that's updated here. Not a huge difference there. But we'll put this update on the with the other handouts that are posted on the Finance Committee page and with the board agenda documents. Okay. Are there any questions on that handout? Pretty straightforward.
So I'm just, so the lots of data on the other 2 pages. So that really, what that's just showing you is going back to 2010, what our current cost sharing formula has provided in terms of total contribution compared to the pupil count. So the 2 far right columns are what was total contribution. And remember, total contribution is, it's the required local contribution, it's the additional local monies, and it's also the funding from the state, whether it's subsidy, state-funded debt, or minimum special education adjustment. So all those things go into the same pool to create total contribution by town. So that's what those 2 pages are telling you.
Okay. The next handout are summary pages for options 1, 2, and 3, we're calling them. And then the back is then just like a graphic presentation of that. So just an overview of the options that you have before you. Option 1 is our current formula, to maintain that current formula. Option 2 would be applying a different formula to the additional local monies that would be a weighted average based on 85% valuation and 15% pupil count. And then option 3 would be applying a different formula to the additional local monies using a weighted average of 60% valuation and 40% pupil count. Those are like the big differences between the options, but I want to walk you through some of the more detailed differences here. So as you know, with option 1, the percent ALM contribution, that's a fixed percentage, and that just applies to the additional local monies. Option 2 would be, as I said, the 85-15% would be applied to the ALM, but that does not mean that those percentages are directly applied to the ALM. How that works is spelled out in that first box there, where you take each town's percent of the valuation and you multiply it by 0.85. You add that to each town's percent pupil count times 0.15, and that gives you the weighted percent ALM contribution. So for Durham, that would equate to a 19.55, Freeport 69.44, and Pownell 11.01, as compared to what we currently do, which is the 21.42, 65.98, and the 12.6.
Can I jump in and just say another distinction between the current option 1? So our current.
I'm going to get that. I'm going to get to that.
Okay, okay, go.
Okay. I think you can jump in if I don't cover it. Okay.
I'll try not to forget.
All right. So, now I lost my train of thought. Option 3 is again the weighted average, using that same kind of calculation, but instead of using the 0.85 and the 0.15 in that calculation, you're taking the percent valuation for each town, multiplying it by 0.6, and adding that to the pupil counts percentages multiplied by 0.4. Okay. Now, that's the ALM, and that's the difference in how the ALM would be split out. In addition to that, option 2 would be having the minimum special education adjustment applied to Freeport only. And option 3 would be sharing the minimum special education adjustment. Option 1, as we said, is static. The percent ALM does not change. Option 2 and 3 would change based on the changes and fluctuations in any town's valuation or pupil count from year to year. All right, Michelle, jump in. What did I miss?
So the other distinction between option 1 that's different from option 2 and option 3 is the required local contribution is how it's calculated is different. So our current formula, as you may recall, we do what's called that equalized mill. So we take the state required mill from what they say each town has to raise in order to be eligible for subsidy, and we apply that to all 3 towns' valuation, and that's the required local contribution for each town. But in actuality, the state says you have to raise a certain amount of money, right? So if your valuation times that required mill creates a number bigger than what they say you have to raise, according to the state, you should raise that lower. So it's the lower of those 2 numbers that you need to raise. Our formula says that everybody raises that required mill. So last year it was 8.28, and right, 8.28, 8.18. It's one of those 2 numbers. And so everybody raised that same mill, right? So what that means is that the amount, the bucket that we're calling additional local monies and what we're going to apply these percentages to in all 3 scenarios is different, right? So in the current formula, the amount that we're applying the ALM percentages to is a larger number, right? No, smaller number. It's a smaller number because the required local contribution is higher in that option 1. Yes. 4. We don't even have a 4. Oh, from the ED 279. I was like, what? Yeah. Right. So
it is the higher of the 2 for RLC.
Right. So how we get to AL? I wish we had a whiteboard. So so we have the total budget, right? And from that number we subtract out our shared revenues, right? We subtract out subsidy and money that's coming in from the state for state-funded debt, for subsidy, and for minimum special education adjustment, right? So money in from other sources, right? And then that gives us how much has to be raised from taxes. And so what we do there is, okay, we've got this number, 26 million, I think, roughly is what last year's number was. And then we say, okay, from that, the 3 towns, there's a required local contribution that they need to provide, right? And we plug those 3 numbers in based on that mill expectation. And then the remaining amount after we subtract that out is what we run through our additional local monies formula. Okay, so when the RLC is higher, because we're using that bigger number, like Maddie pointed out in 4B, it reduces how much is left to go through the ALM. She's trying to find a whiteboard, but yeah, it's okay. So that's the other difference. So that's why when you look at option 1 and you see ALMs in 21, 65, and 12, and in option 2 it's 19, 69, and 11, that doesn't necessarily mean that the impact on the towns is going to be, oh, Durham's is going down 2%, Freeport's is going up 3%, because the amount we're applying that to is different, right? Because we're saying Freeport in option 2 has to raise less in their required local contribution figure, because we're saying the minimum special education adjustment applies directly to them, and then they're only required to raise as much as the state says they're required to raise, not the additional amount that we previously had included. So that's why their percentage might go up in the ALM, but their actual impact could go down of like how much they're actually writing a check for as a town. So So that was just what I wanted to point out, was that, so equalized mill, all revenue shared in option 1, right? Everybody's raising the same amount for required local contribution, all the money in from the state, regardless of what they call it, all thrown into the same bucket, right? Option 2, you're only raising what the state says you have to raise according to your required local contribution, and from that number, you actually, for Freeport, you'll subtract out minimum special education adjustment in years that you get it. So it reduces their required local contribution. And then in option 3, it's sort of a hybrid of those two. It still requires only the amount that the state says they have to raise, but we, instead of applying the minimum special education directly to Freeports, we put that back in with subsidy, like the subsidy that comes in from Durham and from Pownell from the state. So it's more of a hybrid of the first two options, which is why the valuation goes down and pupil count comes up. So carry on.
Questions and discussion, but okay. So at our meeting in Durham back in November, I think it was the 20th, we discussed as a board what we thought would be fair. So what you'll see here on the back page is a presentation of what we heard from the board was they wanted to see what the percent in total contribution was compared to percent pupil count. And what we took back from the board was you felt those numbers should be relatively the same. So you'll see in the gray, I think everybody's got color copy, right? Yeah. In the gray column, that's option 1, that's the current method. So that those numbers are, that percent total contribution is straight off of this busy table that we had in the other handout. Pupil count's in the orange on the far left. And then option 2 is in green, and option 3 is in blue. And the percent total contribution is the first column in each one of those colors. So that would be the numbers you guys were interested in seeing compared to the orange column for each option.
And then Kate added a column that says, okay, and this rolls all the way back to fiscal year 2010, so you can see sort of over time how these different options would have been, you know, created different results, how they created consistent results. I mean, I think the gray column in option 1 and sort of the not a lot of huge variation. There's a little, it's interesting, there's more at the beginning than there seems to be now, I think is kind of what prompted Bill Stockmeyer to say, like, I'm not sure how they came up with these percentages, but they've been relatively, you know, on par with where we would expect them to be over 10 years. So I think that's what that column 1's telling you. And then column 2 and option 2 and option 3, Kate provided a column that says, okay, had we been using option 2 all along, this is what your increase would have been year over year. And you can compare that to the gray column of what our actual increase was year over year. And then that third column in 2 and 3 is what's the difference between what the current model is, so gray, and option 2, and the current model versus option 3. Right? So year over year is that middle column, and then to the right is what's the difference between what we do now and what it would look like in these two scenarios all the way back to 2010. I just want to let her finish if you're good. Is that it?
Yeah, I think that's it. Maybe you might have a question too about fiscal year 13 and 10 and why there's no data there. So we can access the ED 279s, the final ED 279s, which oftentimes are published after we do our budgets.
Actually, during the school year, right? I mean,
or sometimes they're revised during the school year. Yeah, exactly. So you can access those going all the way back to the beginning of the RSU, but unfortunately, we usually build our budget on like a draft version of the ED 279, and in fiscal year 13 and 10, we were unable to dig up in our records the actual draft ED 279 that was used to build the budget. And the reason I would need that to be able to give you numbers there is because I need to know what the minimum special education adjustment would have been, how we would have built the budget, and how we would have taxed each town based on that, because oftentimes that number will change from the draft to the final, and if I were to use the final, it would not be apples to apples comparison to what we actually ended up taxing the taxpayers under option 1. So you could get numbers there, but it would not be like a good comparison to what our current method actually ended up producing in those 2 years.
And thankfully, I mean, those are the farthest, 2 of the farthest ones back, so. Okay. So, as usual in cost sharing, we've sent a lot of numbers your way. We've tried to simplify them in the best way we thought could help people make some sense out of it. Hopefully folks have read through the 3 different options in terms of some of the pros and cons and some of the important points to remember, and I think we covered most of those. So just wanted to see if there were clarification questions on the numbers, on the math, okay.
On option 2, at the bottom of the pros, it says more transparent, the required local contribution aligns to the ED 279, but it does not say that on option 3. Is that still the case?
It's a little bit different because of the minimum special education adjustment. Because it's being shared in option 3, it's not a direct pull from the very bottom of the ED 279, bang, bang, bang. Those are the numbers that we would use in option 2. Not quite there for option 3 because of the minimum special education adjustment. Valerie.
So at the last board meeting when we met in Durham on the 20th, the board asked the finance committee to bring back a proposal that reflects one or more proposal that reflects a concept of fairness that we, the board, defined as equal contributions per student from each municipality, and the contributions would have been figured out by crediting to each town all the contributions that they make towards the education of students in the RSU. And that would have meant that for each municipality, we would have credited each town for state subsidy, monies raised through local taxation, special adjustments for the minimum special adjustment, and all those things that go for each of the towns. Unfortunately, none of the 3 options that are presented today reflect this concept of fairness. Option 1, which maintains the first formula, the current one that we have, is not consistently fair. I sent a document out that I hope everyone received, and I did a deep dive into the numbers, comparing what the towns would have paid if we had used the concept of fairness that the board tasked the finance committee with exploring, and what they actually paid. Using the current formula, you see that if you go back to the year 2014-15, Durham contributed $919 additional dollars over what they would have contributed per student if we had used the method that the board was suggesting to the finance committee that they used. Overall, that resulted in Durham paying $540,000 in addition, extra than what they would have. The following year, in 15-16, something similar happened. Durham contributed $603 additionally per student over what they would have contributed if we had been using the method that the board asked the finance committee to explore. And this resulted in Durham paying $341,300 over what it would have cost them to use that town. Then fast forward to the most current years, and it's a reverse. Whereas before, Durham was over-contributing by a large margin, and Freeport was under-contributing by a large margin, and same with Pownell, but to a lesser extent. What we see in the last 2 years is that Freeport has contributed a whole bunch more than they would have if we had used the method that we asked the Finance Committee to use, and Durham has been under-contributing. So for the last year, which is the one that you guys explore and use to compare with, Freeport contributed above what they would have during the total contributions, $358,000, and Durham underpaid by $233,000, and Pownell by $125,000. These are big amounts of money. This is not what I would say reflects a fairness in the current formula or a consistency in any way. So for the option one to be on the table and presented as something that reflects what the board wanted to see, which is a study of contributions per student, crediting each municipality for everything they bring to the table, it's not really what I had personally envisioned seeing. I don't think it's fair for any municipality to be subsidizing or over-contributing over another one. It doesn't matter who it benefits. It's not fair to do that. I mean, we know that our demographics show that each of our communities has similar median incomes, similar median household tax impact based on the education tax, and similar poverty rates. So I just don't know how that could be described as fair, the first one. The second and third options are equally unfair. They're both are based on the current formula, so they try to maintain the status quo, which means that in essence we're just reflecting the unfairness in the current formula because we're not changing anything. We're just changing the numbers, but in the end we are distributing the ALMs in very, very similar percentages. So we're just perpetuating the lack of consistent fairness embodied in the current formula. Moreover, the options 2 and 3 add a new level of unfairness, which is introduced by the fact that the baseline used to compare the option 2 and 3 to what we would have paid with the current formula is based on a year, which, as I just described, is the last year, which is when Freeport was paying over almost $400,000 addition in or above and beyond what it would have paid if we had used the method that we asked the Finance Committee to explore. So to say that that is a baseline that is fair is patently wrong. I just don't see how we could do that.
And we compared it to all of the actuals over time, so in both ways.
But you're not compared to what the board asked the Finance Committee to compare it to. I mean, the concept that we put on the table was a concept whereas we would take all the contributions that each town puts on the table, divide to arrive at the number that each one is actually contributing per student, and compare that to what the towns would have paid had they been credited for all their contributions, and make sure that that per student we are asking each town to pay the same amount. So that part of the exercise was never done at the Finance Committee. I just don't see any documentation here that there was any work done to figure out how do we make sure that each town contributes per student a similar amount once all of their contributions have been tallied up. I mean, that's not happening here. I don't see it in option 1, I don't see it in option 2, I don't see it in option 3. In option 2, in addition to that, we have, for 2 and 3, as I said, the baseline is not fair because we already are taking a year when things are very askew. and when Freeport was paying a bunch more than it would have if we had been using the method that we talked about on November 20th in Durham. The second option we have already voted on. We already decided it's non-appropriate option. We already described how the way that the valuations track disadvantage Freeport when you have a formula that is very valuation heavy, because the valuations are growing at different and exponentially different rates, meaning that Durham has a slower rate of growth, Pownell in the middle, and Freeport has a pronounced faster growth in valuation. So
I'm not sure that's true.
It matters.
I just don't think that factually it's accurate.
Those are numbers that came from Maine Revenue Services. I sent them to the board to be vetted. The numbers come from the state. So
no, but I'm just saying, to calculate growth rate, you don't accumulate, like, you don't just take the growth rate and add it together. I mean, that's not how you calculate growth rate. I mean, I'm sure that the figure, I got them yesterday, and I have not been able to, I mean, it's not a lot of time to vet a lot of data, so we can talk about that later. But, you know, I'm not saying that the numbers themselves are inaccurate in terms of what the valuations are. I'm saying how you use those numbers to interpret a growth rate, I don't think were accurate from my quick look through. But like I said, I haven't had a chance to walk through all those things. So, I mean, clearly they vary year to year. I would say you're correct in that Pownell and Durham tend to have a smaller band of growth or retraction. But when you look at how much Freeport dropped in a year, you know, over time, you know, they dropped a huge amount and then they rebound more. You know, it's similar to looking at the economies of Massachusetts and Maine, right? Like, they tend to be more variable in those bigger areas. But relative to the beginning of a point in time and now, the growth rate, I don't think, is necessarily exponentially larger in one town versus another. So we can vet those numbers and figure it out. I didn't have time to do it before today from yesterday, but I mean, so we can talk about that, but carry on.
I will carry on. Thank you. So please vet the numbers, but when I look at the numbers and they come from Maine Revenue Services, I see that the rate of valuation increase in Freeport is going a lot faster than in any of the other towns. That's why I don't think that having a formula that is heavy on valuation will benefit Freeport, and I don't think that's fair. But going back to the three options that you have here, the baseline, the year baseline that you're using to compare everything against is a year when you can see in the first page that the Finance Committee proposed. The baseline that you're using is a year when Freeport was, the median income education tax in Freeport was 25% higher than in Durham and 29% higher than in Pownell. However, when you look at the median household income, Freeport has an income that is right in between Durham and Pownell. So again, I don't know how it's fair to say that for Freeport residents to pay that much more for an income, for a household that has similar income, is fair. I just don't see it.
I mean, the
so
issue
I
with that,
wouldn't.
though, is median versus mean, right? We haven't included the mean information here, so having some very expensive property skews that average, right? So
That's why we use the median and not the average or the mean.
But it's
because
not,
we are
it's not,
looking
I mean,
at the bulk of the residents and how they will be
that's not
impacted.
what mean means, right? I mean, that
No,
it's
I'm looking at median. We're looking at the bulk of the
no, it
residents
just
for
means
each
in the middle.
town.
That's all median means is
Yes.
in the middle.
Yes,
The same number less is more, but it doesn't say scope of more or less,
I agree.
right?
But
So-
would you I mean, we're not going to get into the numbers at that level, but when you look at them, I think it's very clear to anyone looking at these numbers
I don't think that's clear at all.
that for a family with the same income in any of the towns to pay 29 or 25% more for the schools is not fair. That's all I'm saying. So I wouldn't consider this year, the last year, as a fair year to establish our baseline to benchmark against. I just don't think it's fair. So I don't think that options
But
2
are we
or
benchmarking
3.
against anything? I mean, it's
So we present the same data, that's on this front page here. That's all here for every year, so it's not just that one year.
But when
you
you do it
talking about
here, yeah, when you do the percentage changes for the actual formula that you are proposing,
none of these
You
have percentage
are-
changes in here.
you're trying to make it so that it will be as close as possible to what we currently have in terms of the percentages for the ALM.
I actually don't think that's true, because if you look at the option 3, they're not close. I mean, option 3 has Durham going up 3% from where, or just shy of 3% from where they were in the current formula. So they're not tied directly to no change.
There are no change, but it's compared to what the change would be to make it fair based on what the board spoke about at the last meeting. It's a much lesser.
Actually, I don't think
change.
that's true. So
But that's
we-
why I wanted to
yeah.
have options that explore the concept of fairness that we defined as a board we wanted to look at. And I don't see any options that allow me to explore that option. So I can't really say why you chose these because I wasn't there. I just know that this is not what the board asked for.
Well,
So
I mean, I think what
would
the board
hope
asked for.
that before I mean, I did spend the hour to review that video to see what the board had tasked the finance committee with doing. And what we asked the finance committee to do was to tally up the contributions that each town puts on the table, whether it's local taxation, state subsidy, minimum special adjustment, whatever it is, and make sure that in the end, each town contributes the same amount per student once all those contributions are on the table. There's nothing here that tells me that that exercise has been conducted by the finance committee. And I can't say why, or I can't explain how else to explain what the board said, but that is my very vivid recollection, which I corroborated by watching the video and by also talking to people who were at the leadership meeting, who mentioned that at that meeting, our superintendent explained to the leaders that this is the direction that the finance committee was going into.
Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure.
So before,
So we did look at that option and determined that there are a lot of different variables that in the end would make that not a viable option to bring to the board as something we would support. And one of the big ones would be the changes in state funding.
so when you say something we wouldn't support, you can speak for the board. The board
No, I'm
tasked-
talking about the finance committee would not support that.
No, but if the board asks any committee to conduct any kind of exercise, it's not up for that committee to decide whether to bring it or not to the board based on what the members of that committee would or would not support. The board asked the finance committee to bring to the table options that reflect that concept of fairness. The finance committee looked at it apparently, chose not to bring it to the board because the members of the finance committee would not support it. There's 3 members of the finance committee. There are 11 of us. We have the right as a board to see that study and to see the numbers and decide for ourselves whether we want to explore that option or not. So before we continue with this discussion, I would like to table the discussion until the Finance Committee brings to the board what the board tasked the Finance Committee with bringing to the board. Thank you.
Okay, so so if we want to table this, we would just need the consensus of the board to do that. Yeah.
I will say I did not go back and watch the video of the meeting. Can you just clarify when you say bring to the board what the board asked? Like, can you kind of put that into a little bit of a...
Yeah, so what we discussed at the meeting was that we would have a study of all the contributions that each town brings to the table. And that we would have an option for a formula that results in every town contributing the same amount per student.
Right, I understand that, what you were asking for, but when you say the board asked, like, how, I don't have a recollection of how that was, like, did we vote on? I mean,
So no, I think
There wasn't
my
a vote.
understanding that there wasn't a vote. I don't believe we voted. I think what we had said was this concept of fairness around contribution was something that overall the board could get behind as like this makes sense to us in terms of contribution. Now, what I heard from the board from that meeting was a variety of ways that that could be accomplished, right? We had people who said, keep it as simple as you possibly can, and, you know, and just tie it to that. And then we had people who were like, you know what, I don't care how complex the numbers are in the background, just tell me what the end number is and how they relate to total contribution, right? So in terms of bring to the board what you asked, total contribution is here in every option, right? And how it relates to pupil count is here for every, well, it doesn't change regardless of the option, number of kids or number of kids. But so our understanding of what to bring was we want to see how the options relate to this concept of fairness, which is around total contribution, and that's what we brought. So we looked at the concept of tying it directly to a pupil count formula, and there were things in there that made it like, geez, I don't know if this is sustainable over time. So, I mean, if the whole board says we really want that number or that option, then we can do that. So I guess, you know, just to eliminate the confusion that we seem to have around these things, I would love for just a straw vote from the board to say that that's what they want us to bring back.
Can I just ask one more question?
Yeah.
Just to clarify again, because what I'm hearing is that when, like, was everyone's individualized request at that meeting, like, written? I mean, like, I don't remember it like that.
No, there was an hour-long discussion.
No,
with
I remember
a
that.
lot
I'm
of
saying, like, well, I
conversation.
don't remember the board as a whole saying, as a whole, maybe as an individual on the board requesting that, but I don't remember it being something that then every other member of the board said, yeah, I want that too. That specific request.
Yeah.
Well, if you watch the video towards the end, which is when it's getting wrapped up, because there was a far-ranging discussion about many aspects of the formula, you will see that the chair said, okay, so what do we bring to the board? I mean, back to the board. And there was some hesitation about, okay, do we want to go this route? Do we not want to go this route? But watch the video, because you will see that the consensus, without straw polls, without votes, without anything like that, was that we wanted to see what the numbers would look like if we had equal per student contribution based on the entire.
Right. Oh, right.
Right.
But
I guess I would have to go back and agree with Michelle that at that point, I think if it's that much of an issue with whether the whole board as a whole thought about it, decided on it, voted on it, I mean, it does need to go back to, I think, like what you said, a straw vote to see if that was actually, like, still, or not actually at the time.
it doesn't matter
right?
then.
It
Like, if
doesn't
people
matter
feel
then.
now that that's
Right.
what they want to see, then
Exactly.
let's move
Exactly.
forward from there. Beth.
I just have a recollection of Kate asking really specifically what Valley was looking for, and we were talking about the per student contribution being within $1,000 per student or something, and we were talking about how you could possibly back in from that to a formula, and that was my recollection of it. So
Yes, Jeremy.
I just wanted to, I've been very quiet today on this, but my understanding really was, what Michelle and Kate are saying, that, we wanted to show what the total contribution and the pupil counts were for any options that we provided. It wasn't, tied to an exact, you must do it this way. So that's why we brought it back in this new format, because, in the past, we had this format that only showed total contribution based on the original formula. It didn't show with the options. So the difference was this now shows all these options, including a new option with those total pupil counts and total contributions. So that was my understanding of coming out of that late November meeting.
So, so I guess I would just love to hear just if you would like to table the conversation for today and have the finance committee bring back a fourth option with a direct tie from contribution to what the formula looks like. So all those in, all those in that would like to see that, if you could just put your hand up. And no? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I missed somebody because there's 11 of us that can't be of even.
Cynthia. So it was done really quickly. So I have for no, I had Kate, Jen, I had Jeremy, Candy. I thought I had 5 written
Me.
down. Michelle, sorry. Michelle.
Okay, so then that was a 6 for yes then.
Yes.
Okay. So all right. So so we will do that, and we will bring it back, and I will extend the offer again to the board members. If you're still struggling with any piece of how our current formula works or how any of these options might work, the ED 279, like all these numbers we're throwing out, I know it's a lot. I know Jeremy, Kate, or I are happy to sit down with anyone and talk through it. I just volunteered you both up. You're welcome. So, if anybody needs a little extra training on that, we're happy to provide it in the meantime, and we will bring that back to you guys. Okay. New business? None?
By tabling that, we stayed right in our time frame.
Well, good. Thank you, Valley.
By tabling it only. Yeah.
All by calculation, right. So, yes.
I just want to express my gratitude for your work because I know it's a lot of work. So, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Personnel, we don't have any, so we're back to public comment, and we do have a couple of folks that have stuck it out with us. So if you wanted to share anything, just ask that you come up to the mic, give us your name, where you're from, and keep your comments to 3 minutes. Come on, guys, nobody? Okay, well, then I would take a motion to enter into executive session as outlined in 1 MRSA Section 4056D for the purpose of discussing administrator negotiations for RSU 5. Valley and Lindsay, thank you. All those in favor? Okay, we are in executive session. 8:24.